Huh.
What? What?
You were right. You didn't do anything wrong. The flag came from an outside.
For the sake of this video, just pay close attention to what he does here.
Who would even know?
I don't know.
Acting is reacting, but Bateman takes this a little further. In this scene, the way he reacts to what's going on tells us a lot more than you'd think. Let me give you a little context before I explain. This clip is from the show Ozark. Jason Bateman, aka Marty Byrde, and his wife Wendy Byrde are both money launderers for the Navarro cartel, so naturally their son Jonah has taken an interest in money laundering too, much to his mother's dismay. Not so much his father though. Marty is almost sort of proud of his son for following in his footsteps.
Jesus, laundering at 14.
Do not be proud of him right now.
Earlier in this episode, we see his mother Wendy sabotage one of Jonah's illegal bank accounts to try and scare him into stopping or something. Jonah, being the 14-year-old kid he is, calls his dad over for help. Marty sorts it out pretty easily until he spots a sign that someone may have tampered with it. When he notices, he starts to think, lowering his head. Then his eyes dart up as he realizes it was Wendy who was behind it, something we'd already known. He then slowly lifts his head up, grappling with the fact that his wife would try to set up their son like that. And here he starts to contemplate whether to tell Jonah or not, looking back and forth hesitantly, then followed by a lie. In this scene, Jason Bateman was able to portray all of that purely through a few head movements, and we understood it. This is something I would call an internal dialogue. We can't hear him talking to himself, but he acts in such a way that we can almost see what he's thinking about, and the process in which he slowly puts each piece of the puzzle together, which literally mimics how we actually think. We don't instantly have a thought pop into our head. We have to think about it and go through multiple different thought processes until we have it. At least in instances where our level of thinking goes beyond something as simple as what am I going to have for lunch tomorrow. Before we continue, let's just take a step back for a second. Back when films were in its infancy, around the 1920s, 1930s, such a thing as an internal dialogue did exist, but in a hugely different way. Both time periods used it as a way to reflect the thoughts and reactions of their characters, but in Ozark it's done more as a way to add suspense to an already highly dramatic show. Whereas back then it was done more of a necessity to portray how the characters felt, as we didn't have sound, so that meant no dialogue. This resulted in a much more exaggerated and over-the-top style of acting, one that made it clear and easy for an audience to understand what they were watching. When sound was eventually introduced as a medium, the internal dialogue sort of took a backseat in a lot of actors' skill sets, as now speech could do the trick and it was much more easier for writers, actors, and audiences to grasp. The internal dialogue became external.
If you do exactly as I say, I can get you out of here.
What?
This is a rescue. I'm helping you escape. Can you fly a TIE fighter?
But in recent times, actors have been using internal dialogue again as an attempt to craft a more in-depth and nuanced performance, and one that adds to the character as a whole.
You said next door?
Another great example of Jason Bateman masterfully utilizing the internal dialogue is right here.
Oh, how was your meeting with Schaefer?
Tricky. Someone in Mexico is lobbying OFAC to keep Navarro on the list. I mean, you didn't hear any rumblings about that down there, did you?
Alright, so context for this scene is that Marty and Wendy are trying to get Navarro out of prison so he can resume leadership of the cartel. It's proving tough, however, since Wendy says someone is stopping them. When she says this, however, Marty freezes, which is his reaction. She asks him if he knows anything and he shakes his head. He's confused, he doesn't know. But as he continues to think, which is what any realistic person would do, he freezes again. His eyes focused on the tabletop. A thought has popped into his head. He then angles his head upwards, as if he's contemplating whether what he's thinking could really be the truth. Any other actor simply would have listened to Wendy's words and skipped past all the different steps of thinking and go straight into a realization. But Jason Bateman understands that acting is reacting. And yes, I'm sure many others have made this connection, but Bateman knows that in order for reacting to truly work, you have to go beyond just reacting, building from it into a different line of thought that then leads into the next line of dialogue. He leaves room for the character to think after having a reaction and then steer the conversation forward in a meaningful way. To fully cement just how great Jason Bateman is at utilizing an internal dialogue, here are just a few more examples of him using it.
Did you have any idea he was working for them?
What do you think? I didn't know that he knew Russ. What are you talking about?
Well, he was.
So yes, Jason Bateman is a really good actor who was really good at utilizing internal dialogue to add depth to his character. But to obtain a better understanding of why I think internal dialogue works, we need to take a look at a bad example of it. Unfortunately, this comes from the Netflix original TV show You. Now, yes, right off the bat, this show is very different in nature from others. We can literally hear Joe Goldberg's thoughts aloud, which pretty much defeats the purpose of utilizing an internal dialogue. But I still think it's a good example to look at just when analysing acting. In this scene, Joe Goldberg has just arrived at this manor full of people, which he pretty much despises. This is his first interaction when he gets there.
But you rather stick out, don't you? So is she actually shagging you, Phoebe, or are you more decorative?
She really is so sweet.
Is it true, though? American men are better in bed, or is it only the Jewish ones?
Is it even legal to say that?
Joking. We're having a laugh. Please try and have a sense of humour at least, Jonathan.
I will if she starts being funny.
Lovely chat, but I'm off to hang myself because you're so boring.
Like I said, I can't afford distractions, not now.
Jonathan, you're here.
Before I start to analyse anything, I just want to say that overall, I think this show is very good. I think Penn Badgley is a great actor, but at the same time, I'd say the writing is a bit iffy. I mean, he's often given entire interactions where he says nothing, the show relying on Joe's narration to build his character. But during some of these blank moments, Badgley does little acting to compensate for this. There's a blaring lack of any facial expressions beyond the odd side eye or the lift of an eyebrow. I'm sure in any other case that would be great, but here his actions are so devoid of any real substance that if I were to cut out Joe's narration, you'd have no clue what he was actually thinking, because he performs most of it with no real emotion or purpose. That's fine, by the way. He has narration to back it up, but all the same, still a bad example of internal dialogue. Here, for example, maybe it's just me, but he says he can't afford distractions in a way that implies ignoring her isn't something he wants to do, but something he has to do, and I don't see any hesitation or restraint or anything in his face. His acting isn't telling me anything about how he feels. It's all up to the dialogue in this case, which I feel makes for a at least somewhat weak show where the acting and dialogue aren't telling me the same thing. It just opens the door to confusion amongst the audience.
Well? Is that your speechless?
While in this show that just doesn't work, there are other instances where confusion is necessary, where it's a part of the very DNA of the thing. I've mentioned realistic acting a few times already. Well, an important part of the natural way we think is that it doesn't always reflect how we act. Realistically, we aren't going to show exactly how we feel. If someone really annoyed you, but you don't want to give them the satisfaction of a reaction, what do? You just smile and walk away like you're unbothered, but on the inside you're really screaming with anger. I think a perfect example of this comes from the film Anatomy of a Fall, specifically from Sandra Hüller's performance. In the opening of this film, Sandra is speaking with an interviewer about one of her recent books. As they talk, her husband Samuel starts blasting music from a few floors up as he renovates the attic. It's important to know that they had just had a huge fight a few days earlier.
You are not a victim! Not at all! Your generosity conceals something dirtier and meaner!
So tensions between the two are high. Sandra's reaction to that is...
It's somewhere working upstairs, my husband.
In this clip, Samuel blaring that loud music is clearly annoying her, but instead of showing any sign of anger, she instead smiles as she takes a sip from her glass of wine. Now I'll say, yeah, it's kind of basic in terms of some of the other acting I've spoken about, but I think it goes deeper than that. After drinking her wine, she flips the interview and starts questioning the interviewer instead. Personally, I believe that here she was trying to flirt, as it is established later on in the film that Sandra is in fact bisexual. So that begs the question, what was she thinking about when she paused? What was her internal dialogue? It may be obvious that she was annoyed at her husband and wanted to get back at him, but I think there are other alternatives. But before I say what I think they are, first we need to talk about the film as a whole. Anatomy of a Fall is completely centered around the question, did she do it? But the writers never give an answer, they never reveal the truth. This sense of ambiguity and uncertainty is a trend that can be seen through the whole film, even down to Sandra Hüller's acting. The film allows for multiple interpretations to be made on what they think, and the same can be said for Sandra and her character. Before drinking, she has a smile spread across her face. But when the glass touches her lips, it fades, and her eyes become deadly focused on the interviewers, almost as if she had bad intentions with her. As she was staring, did the idea to flirt spawn spontaneously in her mind? If so, it would mean that there is still some hope for her and Samuel, as it means that the argument they had previously wasn't still affecting her, and it was only his hazing that had brought about the idea to flirt. Or do those dead eyes she has in that moment suggest that getting back at him and regaining power in their relationship was something she had been thinking about for a while? Was it premeditated? That would mean their relationship has no real passion or love, and has just become this endless game of one-upsmanship. Her acting doesn't give us an answer, but instead gives us the tools to come to our own conclusion, which is the main message of the film. And that is why I think she is a truly amazing actress, and one who is able to utilize internal dialogue masterfully to garner a discussion from the audience. While Jason Bateman's use of internal dialogue is less artistic and has less of an overarching meaning to it, I believe it also does a perfect job at doing what acting is mostly meant to do: reflect reality. And that task is harder than you think, but Jason Bateman is able to do it better than most. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. It took me a good while to write and edit everything. I would be grateful for any support you choose to give. Please make sure to like and subscribe if you felt like you learned something. Thank you and goodbye.